I made the most of this experience of being in the Army and being in Vietnam, and did a lot of my own photography there, and had discovered what the Lomaxes had done in terms of preserving traditional folk music, and so I wanted to do that too, and I made some field recordings. And it wasn't until I think one of the things that triggered this was 10 years after the end of the Vietnam War, when veterans staged their own parade in New York City. I was kind of surprised at how emotionally that hit me, because I think I'd been kind of blocking out. I was in denial about how much the Vietnam experience meant to me. And so I think that was significant in the sense that it promoted me to start to think about taking those field recordings and making some selections, and issuing a cassette tape of field recordings from Vietnam. The Bong Son Blues is what I call the recordings. And I did a couple of, or a small edition of deluxe sets that had a package of photos that I had taken in Vietnam. And
can you discuss exactly what the field recordings were?
Right. I had...
And what equipment you had to...
Well, let me mention this first. Lydia Fish, in fact, I just found in one of the boxes her calling card, and she was on a part of a group project to do oral histories and also folklore. You know, many other people in Vietnam were doing recordings. There was a general in Saigon who particularly made recordings of the Montagnard people. And there were GI rock bands that some did their own original material, and there were some who did covers. And what made Lydia Fish got a hold of me and had heard about this tape that I released, the Bong Son Blues, and so I became part of that project too with my tape. And at one time I had heard that my tape was popular with the military historians at the Smithsonian. But what was unique about my tape is that it was a sampler of a lot of different things. I had recorded some things off of shortwave radio, and I had a friend, and we'd get together in the evening and tune in all over Asia. And I'm telling you, I often said I could go back and spend the rest of my life in Vietnam listening to shortwave radio. It was great. And so some samples of this, well, just Vietnam alone, you could get everything from Montagnard primitive music to a Vietnamese orchestra with a guy who's trying to sound like Frank Sinatra, and everything in between. I just missed the first show, but I'm landing in Pasadena with my newly purchased Super 8 camera and finding out about Film Forum. Well, looking back, I think, yes, I would have continued to make films, but I probably would have been a painter who made films. But because of Film Forum, I became a filmmaker who also made paintings. Well, I did a lot in both, but I mean, Film Forum was so vitally important to have a place to show your work, you know, and to become a part of a film community and artistic community in Pasadena. The latter half of the 70s was a very creative time in Pasadena, and before a lot of the gentrification that's taken place in Old Town Pasadena, when rents were real cheap, and you could have a loft for real cheap, you know, $200 a month. There was a co-op of artists, Pasadena artists, that put their money together and had a gallery. The Arnon Gallery. I mean, this was a time when there were a number of people doing poetry, writing, doing photography, making films, painters. A real rich time for the artists in the area. And one significant thing that took place back around that time, 76 or 77, is Michael Thornberry brought the first espresso bar to Pasadena. And it was in the, there was a restaurant at the Pasadena Inn. And Lisa, I was going to tell you this story. The Pasadena Inn, it had a little diner, and the diner would close up fairly early, and Michael Thornberry would come in, and they weren't using their liquor bar. It was just sitting vacant to the side. That became the espresso bar. And then Michael would, in the wee hours of the morning, would be making his excellent cheesecakes, which he was selling to local businesses, and he ran his espresso bar. But the espresso bar was the hot spot. That was the place where creative people came and ideas were exchanged, and it was a meeting place of creative people, and ideas and plots were hatched, and this was you know, the creative thing going on at the time in the latter half of the 70s in Pasadena. Searching for Planes really was the first of more serious work to come, and actually is the first of what has become the Dream trilogy, which are 3 films that I made that had a very dreamlike quality. Boy, I must have done a lot of exploring in a short amount of time, because one of the things with Searching for Planes is I was using black and white film that I was subjecting to toners. There were the Edwall tints and toners. The tints would color the white part of the film, black and white film. But the toner would actually eat away the black and replace it with that color. And I was putting film in toner bath for several days. And one of the things this caused is for the image to start breaking down. And it looked a lot like it was solarized. It had that kind of solarized edge to it, because the edge of the image was starting to break down from being in the toner so long. So that's one of the things that I was experimenting with. And I remember, you know, at that time too, Craig Rice, we were both like bathtub gin makers, you know, only we were making bathtub movies. We were doing these, processing these crazy things that we were doing in our bathtubs.